Hello, good afternoon. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things at Anna Porter Public Library in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And I am joining you today on my YouTube channel to discuss books that I read in the quarter of 2021. I guess I should say the first quarter in 2021. This is going to be a reoccurring video. I am going to try and do this at least obviously every quarter of the year, and then probably at the end of the year I'll do a huge video about all the books I read, including the themes, the star ratings, and I guess probably give you a general idea of what were my favorite reads of the year, as in and why. So just keep an eye out for those videos to come. If you don't have time to watch every single individual book video that I do, you can always access my quarterly book review reports and get a general idea of what I read, what I thought, and why. Okay, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the books that I read in January, which include Written in the Stars, an LGBTQ retelling of Pride and Prejudice, The Bookish Life of Nina Hill, which is about a young woman named Nina who works in a bookstore, I believe in California, and she discovers that she actually had a father with a large family attached. So that was a great read. Spinning Silver, that was, in a sense, I think it was a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, and it was very well done. It was an adult fantasy read. That's everything that I read in January. In February, I read Again, which is kind of like a young adult literature book, specifically having to do with mental health and like different, not really dimensions, but different alternatives for how things could have played out. So that was an interesting read. A Court of Silver Flames, which I think everyone that follows me on my channel realizes and knows that I am obsessed with the A Court of Thorns and Roses series and practically anything Sarah J. Maas writes. So I exceptionally love that. It follows the story of Feyre's oldest sister, Nesta. And finally, in March, that's when I was able to read the most books of this last quarter. In fact, I listened to 3 audiobooks, so that helped with those numbers, and I read 3 books. So I read Breathless, which follows the story of, I cannot remember the main girl's name, which is sad, but it was a beautiful story about divorce, families falling apart, and also it was definitely a coming-of-age book because she was about ready to go to college and her whole world was kind of falling apart around her. So that was a very highly regarded read that I really loved. I also read The Invisible Life of Addie Larue, which is a dark adult fantasy as well. It follows the life of Addie, who makes a deal with the wrong god and ends up being forgotten for her entire existence. Love Boat Taipei was another young adult book that I read. It was following the story of a Chinese-American young woman. Her name was Ever. Her real name was Everett, but she went by Ever, and she goes to China to go into this program that her parents really wanted her to do, but her passion lies in dancing, and they want her to go into the medical field. So interesting family dynamics there. I listened to the audiobook The Selection. It's another young adult series that is very similar to The Bachelor. Yes, The Bachelor, the TV show. I got vibes of that, especially in a dystopian setting. So that was interesting. Kingdom of the Wicked follows witches in Italy. And finally, City of Ashes. So those are all the books that I read in this last quarter of the year. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to read quite as often as I like, so I'm hoping to increase those numbers by the end of this year, this quarter, the second quarter of 2021. That's a strong tea. So all of these books several of these books had very similar themes. Some of those include more of a literature sort of writing style. Some were romantic in themes. There was a lot of philosophical reads in my reading habits this last quarter. Poetic as well, which kind of goes with the literature style of writing. There was fantasy, of course, action, adventure, contemporary as well, coming of age, and finally, dark fantasy. Some of my favorite books of this year I've noticed were typically more in the dark fantasy genre. My 5-star reads includes A Court of Silver Flames, The Invisible Life of Addie Larue, and finally, or Written in the Stars, and finally, Breathless. Now, Breathless and Written in Stars, neither one of those are necessarily dark in theme, nor are they fantasy, but they're both contemporary, and they're both about love. One is about more of an adult kind of setting, obviously, because they're about adults, and there's not quite as much of this trying to discover who you are or what your priorities are. That was more present, obviously, in Breathless, which is about an 18-year-old girl. So the love stories there were definitely different, but every single one of the books that I have selected and am mentioning as 5-star reads had very strong writing styles. Many of them were more literature-based. I will say Written in the Stars was definitely a rom-com read. I wouldn't actually say that it was literature necessarily, but it was just exceptionally well written, and it was a fun story with fun characters, and it's based on it's a retelling, it's a retelling of a literary story. So that's why I wanted to go ahead and I guess kind of lump it in with themes of why I liked the books. The dark fantasy themes also had a lot of trauma involved in each story, and I like seeing characters grow from their trauma and recognize it and just rise above it, so to speak, and learn how to cope outside of the things that they're dealing with in their heads, as well as the things that they have experienced. They were very raw and deep, and touched on a lot of tough topics that aren't always easy to bring up in a public setting. That is exceptionally important to me when it comes to books. I think books should certainly touch on tough topics, because there's not always going to be someone that you feel comfortable opening up to, and books are a way of feeling connected with the world around you and making you feel you're not so necessarily alone or singled out. So that was something that I really appreciated about my 5-star reads. A lot of the books were certainly eye-opening, especially the 5-star reads. They helped me recognize different coping mechanisms as well as means of thinking. And I gained a few new favorite authors through this experience. E.L. Lockhart, V.E. Schwab, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of my favorite authors of this quarter. Some 4-star reads. 4-star reads that I had include The Bookish Life of Nina Hill, Spinning Silver, Again Again, and finally City of Ashes. 3-star reads include Love Boat Taipei, and I gave it 3 stars for multiple reasons. If you want to figure out all of my reasonings behind that, then you're welcome to go watch that video, but to just get a Clip Notes version, basically, it was a diverse read, but a lot of the facts weren't necessarily accurate according to especially people who identify as Chinese Americans. There were certainly some things that were questionable and not exactly well handled, and honestly, the story in general at one point just wasn't that interesting anymore. It could have been written and gone into a lot of different directions, I think, and I just wasn't pleased with some of the choices that the characters made and how some things were instantly resolved, even though in reality it probably wouldn't occur that quickly. I didn't have any 1-star reads. I very, very, very rarely will ever have a 1-star read, typically because I don't normally pick up a book that I think that I wouldn't be interested in. So, but I did have a 2-star read, and that was Kingdom of the Wicked. And honestly, even now, it's kind of in between a 2 to a 3-star, so maybe more like 2.5. But in general, I felt like the plot line was just kind of all over the place. The main character, in my opinion, had an annoying voice narration, and not necessarily in terms of the audiobook, just in general. She was asking herself the same questions over and over. There was almost no focus to the actual setting she was in, which was in Italy. I mean, Italy is beautiful. I would have loved to have a little more description of that. And just some nitpicky things myself about what I didn't like about it. So that's everything that I've read in the last quarter. I hope that you got a little bit of an idea of what I'm interested in reading. Obviously, I'm a huge fantasy reader. I love contemporary rom-coms and pretty much any book about coming of age or becoming yourself. I feel like those are extremely important and very inspiring. Very, very inspiring. I do plan to continue reading dark fantasy. I'm also continuously reading young adult books. I'm still reading, of course, the Mortal Instruments series and every other series that follows that from Cassandra Clare, which are all part of the same universe. I also want to focus on some rom-coms because I've only read maybe like 1 or 2 that are really considered rom-coms this year, and the current one I'm reading right now, I'm still not really sure how I feel about it, just based on the progression of the characters' relationship to each other. So we shall see. But in the quarters to come, I do want to still focus on literature reads. For instance, I read The Midnight Library, which was really, really close to, in terms of style, to a few other of the books that I've read this year. So I like that literary theme. I like books that have a philosophical theme and make me question whether there are other dimensions, whether there are other realities and possibilities, because I am a person that believes in possibility. Well, alright, that's all I had today, and all I really wanted to say. Again, this video is just to kind of touch on some of the things I've read in the last quarter, some things that I highly recommend, and what I liked about them. Please feel free to recommend other books to me, get in touch with me. I am doing these videos to reach out to you, the world, the community. So please don't be shy, and thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful Friday afternoon.